When I first planned my summer vacation, all I wanted was peace, a little adventure, and some time to recharge away from work and constant family drama, so I booked a cozy beachside Airbnb in a small town called Clearwater Cove, a quiet place with turquoise water, hidden trails, and local shops that made it feel like something out of a postcard. And for once I didn't feel guilty about splurging because I had been saving specifically for this. I had mapped out everything from the hikes I wanted to take, the books I was going to read on the balcony overlooking the ocean, and the seafood restaurants I planned to try, but of course nothing ever goes as smoothly as you picture it in your head, especially not when family gets involved. The family member in question was my cousin Rachel, who has always had this uncanny ability to insert herself into plans without really being invited. And at first I didn't even realize she was circling around my vacation until she called me one evening while I was packing. She started casually asking questions about my time off work, like how long I'd be gone, where I was going, what I had planned, and when I mentioned Clearwater Cove she let out this exaggerated gasp and said she'd always wanted to go there, and I knew in that moment I had walked into a trap. Because Rachel doesn't take hints, and once she gets an idea in her head she finds ways to bulldoze through every boundary you set. I tried to keep things light by saying it was going to be a solo trip and that I really wanted some quiet time to myself, but Rachel just laughed it off, said she completely understood, and then somehow turned the conversation into her asking what dates I was leaving so she could see if flights matched up. I didn't even answer her directly, I just mumbled something vague. But 2 days later she texted me a screenshot of her flight confirmation with the caption "Roomies at the beach." And I felt my stomach drop because she had actually booked tickets without me agreeing to anything. I should have put my foot down right then, but my aunt, her mom, called me the same evening, thanking me for including Rachel and saying how much she needed this break, and suddenly I was cast as the generous cousin giving Rachel this wonderful opportunity, when in reality I hadn't offered anything at all. So when the day came and I picked her up from the airport, I was already mentally exhausted before we even left the parking lot, and within minutes Rachel had started talking about all the things she wanted to do: parasailing, jet skiing, late-night bars, spa treatments, shopping trips, basically the complete opposite of what I had envisioned for my vacation. I tried to remind myself that maybe if I went along with some of her plans, she'd compromise with mine. But Rachel is not the kind of person who compromises easily, and by the time we arrived at the Airbnb she was already calling the bedroom with the balcony hers even though I had paid for the entire place. At first I told myself it wasn't worth fighting over, that maybe she just needed to feel comfortable, but something about the way she tossed her suitcase on the bed like it was automatically hers set a tone that made me uneasy. That first night we went out to eat at a small seafood restaurant I had found online weeks earlier, and I was excited to try their grilled shrimp special. But Rachel spent the whole meal talking loudly about how she had convinced her ex-boyfriend to watch her cat while she was away, clearly enjoying the idea that he still cared enough to help her. And when the check came she just slid it across the table toward me without even glancing at the total, as if paying for her was part of my plan. 2. I tried not to overreact, telling myself it was only the first day and maybe she'd offer to cover something later. But deep down I knew exactly how the rest of the trip was going to go if I didn't start saying no, and yet I stayed quiet because I didn't want to be the bad guy. It wasn't until the second day, when she completely rearranged my carefully planned itinerary without asking me, that I realized things were going to spiral quickly, because Rachel had opened my notebook where I had written down all my plans and literally crossed out the quiet beach day I had scheduled, replacing it with her own list of activities. And when I confronted her she just laughed and said, "Don't worry. You'll thank me later, I'm making this fun." At that point I started to wonder if she had actually come to Clearwater Cove to spend time with me, or if there was another reason she had been so eager to tag along, because her behavior felt less like someone wanting company and more like someone on a mission I hadn't been told about, and as the days unfolded, that suspicion only grew stronger. The second morning should have been relaxing, because I had pictured myself sitting on the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the ocean, maybe taking a quiet walk along the shoreline before the tourists filled it up. But instead Rachel barged into the room at 7 a.m. blasting music from her phone and announcing we were going jet skiing. I tried to explain that I had actually been looking forward to a slower start, but she rolled her eyes and said I was being boring, that vacations were supposed to be about adventure, not acting like a grandma with a book. And before I could argue, she had already thrown on a swimsuit and was standing at the door waiting. Against my better judgment I gave in, partly because I didn't want to start another argument so early in the trip, but also because a tiny part of me thought maybe if I went along with her plan just once, she'd be more open to mine later. That logic quickly crumbled when we arrived at the rental place and I realized she had already reserved 2 jet skis, under my name and my credit card, because she had used the booking confirmation from the Airbnb to pull my payment details and save us both time. I was stunned, but by then the guy behind the counter was already handing me a waiver to sign, and Rachel was grinning like she had done me a favor. The ride itself was thrilling, I'll admit that, but every time I tried to slow down and enjoy the scenery she would zoom past, spraying me with water and shouting over the noise that I needed to live a little, and when we finally returned, she expected me to laugh about it like she had, while I was quietly tallying up another expense I hadn't planned for. What really started gnawing at me, though, wasn't just the money or the disruption, but the way Rachel kept acting as if this whole trip was hers, like I was just tagging along for the ride. Later that afternoon when I suggested walking through the local art market, she flat out refused, saying it was lame, and instead dragged me into a boutique filled with overpriced designer clothes that had nothing to do with the town's charm, and once again she expected me to cover the taxi both ways. That night she insisted we hit a bar she had found on Instagram, a flashy place that played loud music and served drinks in neon glasses, nothing like the small beach bar I had circled in my notebook, and when we walked in, it became clear why she had wanted to come here so badly. Her ex, the same guy she had mentioned watching her cat, was there, leaning against the bar with a drink in hand. At first I thought it was a coincidence, but the way Rachel lit up when she saw him, rushing over as if she had rehearsed the moment, made me realize this wasn't accidental at all, and my stomach twisted when I pieced it together. She hadn't just come on this trip for fun, she had come because she knew he would be here. The ex, whose name turned out to be Tyler, looked surprised but not exactly thrilled to see her, and as they talked, I felt more like a third wheel than a cousin. Rachel introduced me briefly, then immediately pulled him aside, whispering and laughing like I wasn't even there, and eventually they disappeared onto the dance floor, leaving me at the table with 2 untouched cocktails and a growing realization that my vacation had been hijacked not just by Rachel's personality, but by her hidden agenda. I sat there trying to figure out whether to leave or wait, but every time I looked toward the crowd she and Tyler were pressed closer together, and when they finally returned, Rachel acted like nothing was unusual, chattering on about how we should all hang out the next day. On the way back to the Airbnb she was practically glowing, going on about how fate had brought them back together, and that's when I understood why she had been so determined to insert herself into my trip. She had known Tyler would be in Clearwater Cove, and my vacation was simply the cover story she used to get herself here. I stayed quiet, not wanting to set her off, but my mind was racing with questions. How much had she planned in advance? How much of this was about me at all? And most importantly, how far was she willing to go to keep Tyler close now that she had found him again? By the time we got back to the Airbnb, she was already texting him, curled up in the balcony chair I had dreamed of sitting in for weeks, and I lay awake in the smaller room, listening to her laugh through the sliding doors, realizing with a sinking feeling that this trip was no longer mine in any sense of the word. The next morning I woke up to the sound of Rachel giggling on the phone, and through the thin wall I could hear her saying Tyler's name over and over, like a teenager with a crush, except this wasn't some light-hearted vacation fling, this was Rachel plotting something. By the time I walked into the kitchen, she was dressed in a sundress, full makeup, and already holding her purse. She announced that Tyler was picking us up for brunch, except when we arrived at the cafe he made it clear he hadn't expected both of us. His eyes flicked between Rachel and me with a sort of weary politeness, and when Rachel latched onto his arm, leaning her head against his shoulder, I noticed the way he subtly shifted away, not enough to make a scene but enough that I could tell he wasn't as thrilled about this reunion as she was pretending. I tried to keep conversation neutral, asking about the town, his work, how long he was staying, but Rachel kept interrupting, answering for him or steering things back to their shared past. It was uncomfortable, But what unsettled me most was how she kept glancing at me whenever he seemed disengaged, like she was daring me to say something that would ruin her fantasy. After brunch, Rachel declared she wanted to show Tyler our place, meaning the Airbnb, and before I could protest, she had invited him back with us. Tyler hesitated, but she looped her arm through his and pulled him along, and soon enough he was sitting on the very balcony chair I had been dreaming of, sipping a beer while Rachel draped herself across from him, chattering endlessly. I excused myself under the pretense of needing to grab something from the store, mostly because I couldn't take the suffocating atmosphere anymore, and as I walked through the quiet streets I realized just how completely my vacation had been overtaken. I hadn't seen the beach I came for, hadn't read a single page of the book I packed, hadn't even had one peaceful morning to myself, and now my cousin was essentially using my rental as her personal stage to win back her ex. When I returned, I found Rachel alone on the balcony, scrolling furiously through her phone, and she looked up with a scowl. "He had to leave," she muttered, "but he'll be back later. Don't ruin this for me." The sharpness in her tone made my chest tighten, because it was the first time she dropped the cousinly facade and revealed the truth. She wasn't here for me at all, I was just collateral in her plan. That night she left to meet Tyler again, not even asking if I wanted to join, and I sat in the Airbnb listening to the waves outside, trying to decide if I should confront her, call my aunt, or just pack up and go home early. But something kept me from leaving, maybe curiosity, maybe stubbornness, maybe a desire not to let her completely win, and I stayed. Around midnight I heard the front door creak open and Rachel stumble in, whispering into her phone with a mix of desperation and giddiness, "I knew you still cared." I knew it, and I realized she was spinning an entire story in her head that Tyler clearly wasn't sharing. The next day confirmed it, because when we bumped into Tyler at a coffee shop, his face fell at the sight of her. He was polite, yes, but distant, and when Rachel excused herself to the bathroom he leaned toward me and quietly said, "I didn't know she was coming here. I don't want any drama." His words were calm but heavy, and in that moment everything clicked. Rachel hadn't just shown up coincidentally, she had orchestrated this entire thing, probably stalking his social media, probably planning for weeks, and she had used me as her excuse to follow him. When Rachel returned, I didn't say anything, but my mind was already spinning with the knowledge that this trip wasn't just ruined, it was dangerous territory, because if Tyler truly didn't want her around and she refused to take no for an answer, I was going to be stuck in the middle of something messy. That night when we got back to the Airbnb, Rachel was unusually quiet, pacing the balcony while chain texting him, and I started to wonder just how far she would go to get what she wanted, and whether I could stop her without setting off an explosion that would burn me too. By the fourth day I could feel the walls of the vacation closing in on me, because every plan I made was hijacked or discarded the moment Rachel found a way to insert Tyler into the picture, and it became clear that she wasn't just trying to rekindle a spark, she was rewriting history in her head to convince herself that they were destined to be together again. That morning she strutted out of the bedroom wearing one of my dresses, not even bothering to ask if she could borrow it, and when I told her it was mine she shrugged and said, "Relax, you're not even the type to wear this, but Tyler said he always loved me in blue, so it's perfect." My throat tightened at the casual way she dismissed me, like I was nothing more than a supporting character in her story, and I realized then that every day I let her bulldoze me only fed her delusion. Still, I kept quiet, mostly because I didn't want to start a screaming match in the middle of a rental I had paid for, but also because I was beginning to see just how fragile her control over this fantasy really was. When Tyler finally agreed to meet us for lunch, Rachel treated it like a date, ordering for him, leaning across the table to touch his hand, telling long stories from their past, but I could see Tyler's jaw tightening, his eyes darting toward me every time she crossed a line, almost like he wanted me to step in and rescue him but didn't want to make a scene. Halfway through the meal, he excused himself to take a call outside, and the moment he left Rachel's expression changed from dreamy to sharp. "You're not helping," she hissed, glaring at me. "You sit there acting like you're his ally, like you know him better than I do. Stop getting between us." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of her accusation, but the intensity in her eyes made my skin crawl, because she wasn't joking. When Tyler returned, she flipped back into her sweet facade, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just glimpsed the real Rachel, the one who would do anything to get her way. That night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the table, and against my better judgment I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Tyler. I don't think we should see each other again. Please respect this. My stomach sank, because I knew exactly how Rachel would react to that kind of rejection, and sure enough, when she came out and read it, she let out a strangled laugh, pacing the room and muttering that he was just confused, that he didn't mean it, that he needed to be reminded of what they had. I tried gently telling her that maybe she should let him go, that maybe this wasn't the right time, but she snapped at me so harshly it felt like a slap. "Don't you dare sabotage this for me," she spat, her face twisted with something I hadn't seen before. "I gave up everything to be here, and I'm not leaving without him." The words chilled me, because it wasn't just a crush anymore, it was obsession, and I was stuck living under the same roof with her while she unraveled. That night I barely slept, lying awake in the smaller room, listening as she paced the balcony, phone in hand, sending message after message to a man who clearly wanted nothing to do with her, and I realized I had to make a decision: either step in and set boundaries, or risk being pulled deeper into a mess that was about to spiral completely out of control. The problem was, every time I tried to picture confronting her, I saw the same sharp look in her eyes from earlier, the one that said she would rather destroy everything around her than admit defeat, and I started to understand that my cousin hadn't just taken over my vacation, she was using me as a shield in a battle she had already decided to win, no matter what it cost. By the fifth day I could hardly recognize the trip I had planned, because the notebook I'd once filled with quiet mornings, local adventures, and small pleasures was now buried under Rachel's chaos, her clothes, and her endless drama with Tyler. That morning, I found her crying on the balcony, mascara streaked across her face, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. She said Tyler had blocked her on social media, stopped answering her calls, and told her in no uncertain terms that he wasn't interested in starting anything again. I thought this would finally be the breaking point, the moment she'd pack her things and leave, or at least accept reality, but instead she turned on me with a bitterness I hadn't expected. "This is your fault," she said through clenched teeth. "He sees you siding with him, he sees you judging me, you've poisoned this trip." I tried to stay calm, explaining that Tyler's choices had nothing to do with me, but she wasn't listening. She was convinced that I was the obstacle, that somehow I was standing between her and what she believed was her future. That afternoon she stormed out without telling me where she was going, and I felt a sense of relief for the first time in days, using the chance to walk along the beach, finally breathe in the salty air, and remind myself why I had come here in the first place. But when I returned to the Airbnb, the atmosphere was different. Her suitcase was open, my clothes were scattered on the bed, and I realized she had gone through my things. At first I thought she had just taken something to wear, but then I noticed my wallet was missing from the drawer where I'd left it. Panic set in as I searched, until Rachel walked in, holding shopping bags, smiling like nothing was wrong. When I confronted her, she rolled her eyes and said she had just borrowed my card because she knew I wouldn't mind, and besides, she'd picked up a dress for me too, as if that somehow made it acceptable. I was furious, but before I could demand she leave, she dropped the next bomb. Tyler had agreed to meet her one last time, and she had invited him to the Airbnb that night. I froze, because the thought of Tyler walking into this storm made me sick, but she was already texting him the address, ignoring my protests. When he finally arrived, the tension in the air was suffocating. Tyler stood in the doorway, arms crossed, making it clear he hadn't wanted to come but had only shown up to make his message final. Rachel immediately launched into her performance, clinging to him, pleading with him to remember their history, insisting they were meant to be together, but Tyler pulled away, his voice steady as he said, "Rachel, this isn't healthy. I didn't ask you to come here. You need to stop." For a moment I thought she would crumble, but instead she spun toward me, eyes blazing, and shouted, "See what you did. You've been against me this whole time. He would still love me if you weren't here." Tyler looked at me with something close to pity, then turned back to her and said words I'll never forget, "Rachel, stop blaming her. She's not the reason I don't want this. You are. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the waves outside, and Rachel's face twisted into something I can't even describe, half heartbreak, half fury. She threw the glass she'd been holding against the wall, shards scattering across the floor, and for the first time I felt genuinely afraid of my cousin. Tyler backed toward the door, muttering an apology to me, then slipped out into the night, leaving me alone with Rachel, who stood shaking, her chest rising and falling like she was holding back an explosion. I didn't move, didn't breathe, because in that moment I realized the twist I hadn't seen coming. Rachel hadn't invited herself on my vacation to heal, or to have fun, or even just to chase Tyler. She had come here with a plan to trap him, and I had been the unwitting cover story that made it all possible. And now that her plan had crumbled, I was the only one left for her to unleash her rage on. The silence after Tyler left felt heavier than anything I'd ever experienced, as if the air itself was pressing down on me, and Rachel stood in the middle of the room trembling, shards of glass at her feet, staring at the door like she could will him back if she just wished hard enough. I wanted to say something, anything that would break the tension, but before I could, she turned to me with a look that made my blood run cold. You ruined everything, she whispered, her voice thin and shaking. He was going to come back to me until you showed up, until you kept inserting yourself. I reminded her it was my vacation, my Airbnb, my money, but logic didn't matter anymore. She was lost inside her own narrative, and in that story I had become the villain. She stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled, and I locked myself in the smaller room, clutching my phone, torn between calling my aunt or the police. I didn't sleep that night, every sound making me jump, until just before dawn I heard the front door open and close softly. I waited, then peeked out, and her suitcase was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was laced with dread, because I had no idea what she planned to do next. A few hours later I got a text from my aunt thanking me for looking after Rachel, saying she had just called her from the airport, insisting the trip had been life-changing. I nearly laughed at the absurdity, but then another message buzzed through, this one from Tyler. It simply said, she came to my hotel last night. Said you invited her. Said you were both staying here because of me. My heart sank as I realized the depth of her manipulation. She hadn't just hijacked my trip to chase Tyler, she had rewritten the entire story in her head, casting herself as the victim of a cousin who supposedly dragged her here, a cousin who conspired to keep her away from the man she loved. I quickly called him, explaining everything, and he sighed with a weariness that told me this wasn't the first time she'd spun lies to get what she wanted. I'm leaving today, he said firmly. I suggest you do the same. That was when I finally decided enough was enough. I packed my things, called the rental owner, and cut my vacation short, driving away from the turquoise water I'd barely had time to enjoy, my carefully saved getaway reduced to a cautionary tale. But the true twist came a week later, when my aunt showed up at my parents' house with Rachel in tow, both of them acting like nothing had happened. My aunt hugged me tightly, thanking me again for being such a supportive cousin, and Rachel smiled sweetly, slipping an arm around me as if we were the closest of friends. I was too stunned to react at first, but then I realized what she was doing. She was rewriting the story for everyone else, painting herself as the heartbroken girl who had needed a supportive cousin to help her through a tough time, erasing all the lies, the manipulation, the danger. And the worst part? My family believed it. They praised her for being brave enough to move on, praised me for being patient and generous, and not one of them questioned her version of events. Standing there, forced to play along, I understood the full reality. Rachel hadn't just taken over my vacation, she had taken control of the narrative itself, and in doing so, she ensured that no one would ever believe my side if I tried to tell it. Even now, months later, whenever someone brings up that trip, my family smiles and says how wonderful it was that Rachel and I got to bond. I just nod, because there's no point fighting against a story she's already rewritten, but inside I know the truth. That my cousin didn't just invite herself on my vacation. She took it, twisted it, and left me holding the pieces of something that was never really mine anymore.